So I chose to write my SRP about type 2 diabetes, and I chose to write it in the two subjects, biology and physical education. And I chose these two subjects because I find them very interesting. I like to learn about how learn about the body and what functions the specific body parts and organs have for the body, and what happens when something doesn't work, like in type 2 diabetes, when the insulin doesn't work. And at the same time, I like to look at how a healthy lifestyle is important, like for type 2 diabetes and diabetic patients, how it is important for them to have a healthy lifestyle. So the development of type 2 diabetes, it comes from an unhealthy lifestyle based on no exercise and a high calorie diet. And this causes a rise in the amount of sugar in the blood, and this is also called the blood sugar or the glucose concentration. And you say when the blood sugar is constantly higher than 6.3 millimoles per liter, you say you're diagnosed with the disease, the type 2 diabetes. So I'm also going to show the regulation of the blood sugar in an animation, where you see how a normal blood sugar is regulated versus how type 2 diabetic patients' blood sugar is regulated. So first we see how a normal person's blood sugar is regulated. So when you eat calories, they're broken down to glucose, as we see. So glucose, we see the glucose in the blood, which go down to the muscle cells. So we see a muscle cell right here, and the cell membrane and the glucose. So the glucose isn't allowed into the muscle cell without the insulin. So we see here they aren't allowed in. So when the glucose rise in the blood, the amount of glucose rise in the blood after a meal, the pancreas will start, the pancreas beta cells will start to produce the insulin molecules, as we see here. So this is the insulin. And now the insulin will start to bind to this purple thing here, which is the insulin regulator receptors. So when they bind, this causes for the glucose channels to open. And the glucose is actually transported by some transporters called GLUT4. So when they're transported into the cells, the muscle cells can burn the glucose for energy or store the glucose for later as energy as well. So when the glucose is allowed into the cell, the blood sugar will fall again. And this is how a normal blood sugar is regulated. And now we see how a type 2 diabetic patient's blood sugar is regulated. So again, we see how the insulin molecules bind to the receptors. But right here, we see how the message from the insulin molecules and the binding, with the insulin receptors, is ignored. So, and some other, they're ignored, and now another, some other insulin molecules bind to the receptor again, and this will open for only one glucose channel, because the amount of glucose channels is actually reduced when you got type 2 diabetes. So either the glucose will have a hard time binding to the glucose receptors, or the message will be ignored, or the patient will be totally insulin resistant, and this happens. When this happens, the glucose cannot get into the cells. So yeah. So it's difficult for the body to absorb the sugar from the blood to the cells, and this causes a constantly high blood sugar. So the glucose isn't let into the cells, so the muscle cell can't use this for energy. And this is the main problem for type 2 diabetic patients, that the blood sugar is way too high than a normal person's blood sugar, because the glucose can get into the cells and be burned or used for energy. And the treatment of the disease is a change in lifestyle, because you develop type 2 diabetes through a bad lifestyle. So by training and eating healthy, you can actually treat yourself from this disease. And this is also proved in a Danish television program called U-Turn by Chris McDonald, where a lady actually got cured from the disease through hard training and a clean and healthy diet. So it proves that the lifestyle is a very important factor for the development and treatment of the disease.